Welcome back to the 6th Gear Garage. Today, I'm going to be installing these steering components on this 1980 Toyota long bed. Now in the last episode, I upgraded the suspension using parts from 3 generations of Toyota pickups in order to use drop spindles on this 1980 chassis. And these steering components are a mixture of 1980 parts and 1991 parts. One of the things missing from this part truck was the Pitman arm. And you can see here, somebody just cut it right off at the end link. And I looked everywhere, and you can't just buy a new end link for the Pitman arm. So I had to buy a whole new relay rod / center section, whatever you want to call it here. And it has a new end link for the Pitman arm. And down on the other end, there's a new end link for the Idler arm, which is still good, so I can reuse this. The original tie rods are real sloppy, so I went ahead and replaced those with parts from a 1991 to match my 1991 suspension setup. So I have the outer and the inner tie rod. I am, however, going to have to reuse the clamp that holds them together from the original 1980 suspension, which is not a problem because this truck is from rust-free Oklahoma. And I'm also going to reuse the original steering stabilizer because it seems all right. And for now, we're going to throw on the original steering box, although I do have the one from the other 1980 in case this one turns out to be bad. And speaking of the other 1980, let's have a look under here to see the Pitman arm. And I have to reuse this one because nobody sells these for the 2-wheel drive trucks, only the 4-wheel drives. And wow, look how rusty everything is on this truck. And for now, I need to keep the steering together on this truck to keep it mobile. So once everything is swapped over to the new frame, I'll pull that Pitman arm off and install it onto this 1980. The threads came up about a ½ inch farther on the new end link. So instead of counting threads to install the new one in the exact same position as the old one, I had to take some measurements. This won't be 100% accurate, but it should be fine to allow me to roll the chassis around the garage for now. I won't be ready to align the truck until it's fully assembled because the weight will affect the height and suspension geometry. Heat and a big hammer weren't enough to break apart the idler arm from the ball joint, so I had to bust out the pickle fork. I installed the 1980 idler arm, and then the tie rods from the 1991. Now to remove the steering stabilizer. Now this old one is going to the scrap pile. And these are going to go back on the truck. Right away, I noticed that I had some pretty major toe out. To get things a little closer to zero, I rotated the clamps to pull the tie rods closer together, which brings the toe inward. And that was better. Next, I installed the steering stabilizer. And then the steering box. Once the truck is together and sitting level, I'll check the oil level and top it off with gear oil. So with that done, I got to retouch on last week's video about the front suspension. I didn't have all the parts I needed to install the strut rods yet. However, now I have that. I got this side installed using some parts from the 1980 and some parts from the 1987. So here's how I did it. Here we have the passenger side from the 1980. I already took this all apart and repainted this bracket because it had some surface rust on it. And here is the very crusty one from the rusty 1987 parts truck. The holes are too far apart on the 1980 bracket to be compatible with the 1991 control arms that I have on the truck, but here you can see the 1987 ones are closer together. So I need the 84 plus 2-wheel drive strut rod, and I need to use the bracket from the 1980 because these holes match the holes in the frame. These do not. And while I have this all apart is the ideal time to replace this old crusty sleeve and these 40-year-old rubber bushings with some urethane ones and the new metal sleeve. Part numbers for all these things will be down in the description. First challenge was to break the rusty bolts loose. My impact didn't stand a chance. I loosened the inner nut, but the outer one decided to fight me. So I got out the torch. Then I clamped the rod in the vise, gave it some PB blaster, and the impact was still hopeless. So I used the breaker bar. It is getting easier. Oh, that was hot. So don't need this. And really, all this hardware, as you saw, is pretty rusty, so I'm not even gonna reuse any of that. Instead, I'm gonna reuse the hardware that was on the 1980 strut rod because it's from down south. Get the worst of this rust off the threads. Throw some PB on it. Nope, back to the vise. As much as I like to start with fresh, clean, rust-free hardware, this bolt is not coming off. So we'll just leave that guy in place since I don't need to remove it. Make sure it's in about the same place as the original one, so the alignment will be somewhat the same. This adjustment here affects the caster, by the way, how forward or backward the front wheel is sitting. So we're looking pretty good there. So now we're gonna reuse the rust-free washer from the 1980, the new bushing, the sleeve, and that bushing. And then next comes the bracket. Then comes the new bushing. And then the next washer, and the lock washer. And finally, the nut. And just finger tight for now is good because I'm going to need a lot of play right here to install this. Now to install the bracket, there are 4 holes in the frame and they hold these 14mm bolts. So we've got 1, 2 at an angle here, 3, and 4. Did I put this on backward? Yeah. Okay, so everything I just did, never mind that. This is the way it should go. And the bushing, big washer, lock washer, and nut. And now I have these 2 long 17mm bolts and they go up through the holes in the strut rod, through these 2 sleeved holes in the lower control arm. However, I've done the ball joint flip and I've moved the ball joints to the top side of the arms instead of the underside of the arms. So now this lower ball joint will interfere with this bracket. You see it's not sitting flush on top like it should. So my easy solution is just to flip it over and thread it through the other side, and that'll hold the bolts tight. And you can also see I've had to notch out this bracket a tiny bit just to clear the 3rd inside bolt here on the lower ball joint. And I also need the suspension to be somewhat compressed to do this. If I had the frame jacked up in the center and this was drooping down, it wouldn't really line up. I might have got some paint in these threads when I painted these brackets, so just throw a couple drops of oil on there, help those bolts slide in. And now, tighten this big nut. And there you go. The front rods are installed, the front suspension and front steering is done. Next time, we move on to the rear. Thanks for watching.